Hey everybody, I have some exciting news to share with you. Here at Rock Harbor, we are going to be hosting a prophecy conference on October 4th. It's a Saturday, and it's going to be right here in Bakersfield at Rock Harbor Church. And we're going to have a prophecy conference about the apostasy of the church. But we're not only going to talk about what's going on in a negative way in the church and how the church is losing its grip with the culture and not contending for the faith. We're going to talk about ways in which we as individual Christians can re-engage in the fight and battle through what's happening not only in the West but around the world. And so we're going to have a great cast of speakers and some top-notch guys that I have lined up, and they're going to have a one-day shot of not only exposing what's going on, but equipping us in, okay, what can I do to be salt and light? How can I go about confronting this that I see in my churches, that I see in my community, that the church is not doing and the pastors are not doing? We are having a leadership deficit. And so we hope from this conference to encourage many people at the grassroots level to take ownership and say, hey, look, will you be able to take out the truth and contend for the faith, be salt and light, because the churches are not doing it anymore. The pastors are not doing it anymore. So it comes down to our responsibility. And so that's what we're geared up for, and it's going to be great. You're going to be blessed, and you're going to walk away fully equipped to be able to handle this culture. And so hopefully mark down your calendars that hopefully you can attend in person, but if not, we'll have a live stream for your event, for anyone that can't make it, and it will, either way, it'll be a blessing for you. So mark the date, October 4th. It's a Saturday here in Bakersfield, California at Rock Harbor Church. Hope to see you then. Okay, the first Hebraism I want to tackle tonight then, we'll hit several of them, is, did not your fathers do thus, and did not our God bring all this calamity on us? And that's in Nehemiah 13:18, referring to the Babylonian exile that they had just went through. The issue then becomes, it's a principle of what we call collective guilt. And it's not like the wokeism collective guilt to where you and I are guilty for something that happened 250 years ago. But it's a collective guilt if the generations keep repeating the same sin over and over again. And you know, what their fathers had did is obviously in context had ignored the Sabbath, especially the Sabbath years. And there was a total of, I think, every Jubilee, every seventh year, you had to give a Sabbath rest for the land. And it ended up costing Israel 70 years, because that's how many years they had missed of not keeping a Sabbath year. So it ended up being a total of 490 years, and then 70 years out of that. So that's why the Babylonian exile was 70. So with the exile, this is what their fathers had did. This is what their ancestors did. They had repeatedly for 490 years not kept the seventh Sabbath year, where you're supposed to give the land rest. So God forced them off for 70 years to give the land rest. And so the idea is, when they come back, is we cannot keep doing the same thing. Otherwise, it'll happen to us as a generation. And so what you're looking at is historical patterns. And what you're looking at too is going back even to the other idiom, if I visit the sins in the third and fourth generation, it's that kind of concept where proclivities, certain sins are passed on as normalized. And so that additional generation that takes it, the younger generation that takes it up, gets penalized for the same thing. So it's not that God is penalizing the younger generation for the older generation. It's that they keep repeating the same thing that's getting passed on generationally. And that's what the passage in Nehemiah means. And the idea then, it comes to a very, very applicable thing for all of us. And I deal with this a lot in counseling is, you have to be the first person in your family to break the cycle of what's going on in your family. Like I've mentioned before, we have good things that our families pass on to us. Sometimes they're very godly things, but then you look in our families and a lot of times there's bad stuff that's being passed through. There's idols that are being passed through. There's ways of managing life that are passed on, and a lot of those things are destructive. A lot of those things are not correct. And look, if you don't see it, number one, if you don't identify it, you can't stop it. And a lot of people, I hate to say this, become blind to their own family. They start idolizing their parents, they idolize their family, and they put their family in a position of God rather than God being on that position. And they idolize their family, and especially their parents. And the Bible wants you to see it wants you to see people in the proper light. It wants you to see that, yeah, there are good aspects of people and there's bad aspects of people, and you got to see both aspects. You can't just blind yourself to one. You can't just say someone's all bad or someone's all good and they have no flaws, or whatever. You can't do that. You have to see them holistically, as the Bible would see them. Someone's made in the image of God, but also is a sinner. So what ends up happening a lot of times is people idolize their parents so bad because they want their parents to fit into the ideal structure of what their parents should have been. And look, I deal with a lot of people in counseling that, we're talking about people whose fathers or mothers were horrible, horrible people, horrible, and yet they idolize them. And it seems bizarre when you first encounter that, but it's the person trying to fit their parent in an image that they don't belong in, and they idolize them. I've talked to women that have been repeatedly molested for all their junior high and high school years by their father, and they still idolize their father. Now, you would think, well, that doesn't seem rational. That doesn't seem like that's insane. Yeah, I know, but when you idolize somebody, you put them in that category, and you have a wish hope that that's what they would be or could be or whatever, then you will go blind to them even molesting you. That's how bad it gets. And a lot of times, if that pattern's not broken, that person will repeat the same sins on and on and on in their lives and continue to do the same things. So, that's one of the things, is to see your family objectively and see your friendships objectively, see yourself objectively. And that's what the Bible wants you to do. It wants you to get into reality. So then when you do get into reality, and this is what Nehemiah is saying, is, look, man, we just paid the price for 70 years being stuck in Babylon because of what our ancestors did. And we're not doing this anymore. We're going to break the cycle. And that's where you have to get to in your own life, is I've got to start fresh. I got to start like an Abraham and Sarah and start this new venture in my life. And, from this point on, the junk stops and the good stuff starts. And you try to make your way through life like that. And no one's perfect, I get that. But you at least have to start. You at least have to see the cycle and in order to break it. If you're really in tune with this and you want to dive into more, what you want to look at is the book of Judges. The book of Judges continues to show a repeated cycle that gets repeated in Israel's history. And the cycle just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. But the cycle goes downward. That's the problem. It doesn't stay at this level. It starts cycling, but it goes downward, which means every time it cycles, it gets worse. And then it cycles and gets worse. And then it cycles and gets worse. And so if you watch the pattern in the book of Judges, every generation that goes through gets worse. Well, that's the same as a family. If the cycle is not broken in a family, then it continues to get worse and worse with each generation that passes. And really, that's the blindness of it. So you'll hear the charismatics, and they use the term, generational sins, and there's some truth to that. It's not so much how the charismatics look at it, but there is generational sins that get passed on, and And it's just repeating patterns. That's all it is. It's associations and patterns that the person just keeps doing, and they don't recognize it. That being the case, then in order to break it, you have to identify it, and then after you identify it, then you have to replace the pattern with the biblical pattern. So you just can't just stop doing it and not do anything. You have to replace the pattern. That's what ends up being a problem. And then the other problem is that there's a reward attached to the pattern, typically. So like in a family, I'll give you an example, like the family will reward the person for acting in this family standard. You know, if whatever the family standard is, if they do it, then they get the pat on the back, they get the approval and affirmation from mom and dad or grandma and grandpa or whoever, and that affirms that situation, and that becomes the reward. And that's what keeps them in the game. That's what keeps them doing it, because they get accepted in their family. And that's a hard pattern to break. So that's why if they won't see their family objectively, then they won't stop getting the reward from it. And the reward is like the gasoline that keeps the lie going in them. And so that has to stop. And they have to stop getting a reward for that. But you can't just leave the person, when you're counseling the person, you just can't leave the person with nothing. You have to replace it. So it's the principle of take and replace. So if I take something away, that thought pattern, that behavior structure is bad, I then have to come back and replace it with the proper behavior structure and proper thinking. So it's the principle of take and replacing. And this is what we would call renewing your mind. I'm going to take something and that's wrong and replace it with that which is right, and create a new thought pattern and a new neural pathway in my brain, so I can think differently. And it's sometimes hard, because the minute you stop doing the family pattern, you get rejected. That's instantaneously, you get rejected from your family. And that's what a lot of people don't like. They don't like the fact that their mom and dad now reject them and whatever. And some of it's pretty harsh. You know, I was reading some case studies about this, and, you know, a girl, her family had a line of brujas, witches in Mexico, and her whole family was in line, just witch after witch after witch after witch. And they wanted her to be a bruja, and she came to faith in the Lord, and she had wanted nothing to do with that. And so she instantly got rejected. And the bruja, her mom, started putting curses on everybody that was attached to her, that trying to convert her, you know, out of witchcraft into Christianity. So it was a lot of demonic activity and stuff like that. But the point is, she finally broke the pattern of the witchcraft, and so she got rejected. Her mom didn't want anything to do with her, and things kind of fell apart. So that's what happens. And so it could be anything, and that's pretty extreme, but that's an example of that. It could be anything. It could be workaholism. It could be the god of money. It could be the prestigious jobs. It could be credentials. It could be anything. It doesn't matter. Social structure, whatever. So anyway, that's the big issue that they're going on here. And so what Nehemiah is doing is invoking collective memory to warn people, which was Sabbath breaking that triggered the exile. And that's kind of what we're doing even today in the West, as we're watching the West continue to crumble in front of us. We're trying to warn people in our culture that if you keep going the way we're going, if we keep rolling and you keep having more Charlie Kirk's deaths and more of this rabid anti-Semitism and this rabid violence that people think that's okay, you're going to get punished at some point in time. You're gonna pay the price for living and thinking that way, and that's a collective problem. And so there is a collective guilt that's going on in the West, because if this is not confronted, if it's not stopped, and we go over the cliff, collectively, those who didn't do anything about this are going to be guilty, even though they did nothing. Those who did nothing will be partly guilty for that. obviously if you're the person saying something and trying to do something, then you won't share in that. But look, man, if the West goes off the cliff, you and I are still going to be indirectly affected, even though I didn't do it, even though you didn't do it, we're going to be indirectly affected. And that's the idea of collective guilt. You can't escape it. You are a product of your environment, of where you're living, and if your environment goes down the tubes, you're going down with it. And that's why I can't understand why so many people are not waking up. I mean, you are. I'm speaking to you guys, but I mean, I've been watching a lot of my news feeds and a lot of the information on X and social media. Man, it's off the chain. And just what I saw on Sunday after we talked about Charlie Kirk, dude, the majority of churches here in town, they didn't talk about it, anything. Didn't say boo. Didn't say nothing. Not even a prayer. The best some of them did was like, well, we want to pray for the confusion in our times. Confusion? Hey, man, why don't you just shut up and go sell insurance? Just get out of the pulpit, because I don't know what you're here for. And you look at that and you're like, you're a loser, man. And you're a loser because you're not doing your job. You're the same guy that shut down their church for a year and took money from the government. You're the same guy that doesn't say anything about the anti-Semitism raging through our culture. You're the same guy that doesn't talk about Israel. You're the same guy that pushed the vaccine. Who are you? And so the problem is the church in general is going to pay a collective guilt price for what's happening in the West, because the church is responsible for the morality and the thought patterns that go on in our society. Now, again, God separates the righteous and the unrighteous. He separates the wheat and the chaff, and he knows how to do that. So I'm not trying to scare you or anything like that, because you're the ones that are fighting against this. You're the ones pushing the narrative of truth. But we will secondarily be affected. Not in a primary way, but in a secondary way. And God will spare us whatever he needs to spare us of. But I want you to think through this. Did Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get taken in the exile? Yes, they were not spared. So the collective guilt even went on Daniel, Shadrach, and Meshach, and Abednego. It went on them. And they were taken in exile. So much so that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel were circumcised. They were already circumcised. They were made eunuchs when they got to Babylon. So, castration. That's the word I'm looking for. They were castrated. But Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't do anything. Yeah, I know. But that's what I'm talking about. This is the principle here of collective guilt, that even a guy like Daniel can be taken into the exile and castrated. Now, God used Daniel, as you know, over there, but he went into the exile. And that's kind of the point that Nehemiah is trying to make, is that we all bear the responsibility for what's going on in front of us. And, you can be Daniel and still get taken in the exile. And so that's why I'm so trying to get the word out and trying to get the information out and the truth out and try to warn people, because the way things are going, it's not good. It's not good at all. I'm hoping that a lot of people will rally around, what they saw with Charlie and step up to the plate, and maybe that will happen. I hope, and I think some people are doing it. But look, man, when you look on Sunday morning on the churches here in town and they didn't do anything, I can tell you that. I can tell you already where it's going on that. Anyway. So it talks about corporate solidarity, reinforces the principle from Deuteronomy, covenant blessings and curses fall on a nation as a whole. On a personal level, on the application, this Hebraism is trying to tell you that again, it's the old line, you're doomed to repeat things if you forget history. That's the idea. That's the mention. We all know that saying, that if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. Well, yeah, that's the problem. And then obviously 1 Corinthians 10, Paul always says, when you look at Israel, don't look at it and then shame them. You're to look at Israel and say, yeah, that's me personally. You're to self-apply what they do corporately and collectively. You're to apply it to yourself and saying, yeah, I can do the same thing, or the church can do the same thing, or the society can do the same thing. And that's the thing coming from that. Okay, let's go to the next Hebraism. And this comes from Job 1:7 and 2:2. And it's in regards to Satan. And obviously Satan has the ability to come before God. Satan cannot go into the New Jerusalem, but he can go into the third abode where God is. He can go before the throne and speak to God, and he does. And so in this situation with Job, if you read it, Satan gets an audience with God, and God asks him, where have you come from? What are you doing? And Satan's response is from going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it. And that's a Hebraism, obviously. And it's the idea of not just wandering around aimlessly. It is describing a constant movement of Satan, and it's intentional surveillance is the idea. It's a military term of patrolling. And so when he asks him what he's been doing, he's basically saying, I have been patrolling and doing surveillance on the people of earth. And he's going about all the earth to observe. And what is he observing? He's looking for ways to further his agenda. He's looking for ways to influence leaders, influence key people in positions to get his agenda across. And he's looking to devour people. And I think I've mentioned this before, when it says, like in 1 Peter, that he's like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. What he's doing is seeking to, obviously, we're believers, is take away your influence. He cannot touch your salvation. He can't kill you. But what he can do is devour your influence and destroy your reputation, destroy your character, destroy everything you have, so that you can't make a difference in this world. And he can do that through a number of things. He can do that through sin. He can do that through fatigue. He can do that through health. He can do anything he wants. He can bring destruction upon you and see if that will take everything away from you. And that's the idea. So, and again, you're probably, when you look at that, Peter is not referring that Satan's probably going to go one-on-one with you. He's just going to use one of his minions on you. He is probably busy with world leaders and going behind the George Soroses of the world and dealing with these guys that are billionaires and influencing them. He's not going to spend his time on someone like you or me, but who he will send is someone of his minions, lower ranked, either fallen angel or demon, to harass you personally, and they're assigned to you. And so what they're doing is observing the same thing. So roaming to and forth on the earth is another term for satanic activity. Okay, and of course, satanic activity is surveillance. What are these people doing? How can we tempt them? How can we take them down? And how can we take away their influence? So you're being monitored. It's a military term. And so he's monitoring, and we don't know how many of them there are. If there are guardian angels and at least 2 are assigned to each person, you're talking at least the angels are in the billions and billions and billions and billions of those. So a third of them fell. So you're still probably talking billions or whatever. And then of course you got the demons. So they're assigned to you, and they're walking to and fro what they can do to take away your influence. That's the idea of spiritual warfare. And so he's seeking opportunities to take advantage of you. He's seeking ways to hinder you. And I say he, I'm talking about the familiar spirits with you, of what can they do to stop you from what you're doing. That's it, And One of the things is to make you too busy to serve. That's one of the things. The other thing is to make you so fatigued that you won't do anything. And that means that you're living with no margin. When you're so fatigued that you don't have time to do anything, that means that he's got you. And so we use a term busianity rather than Christianity. And someone's that busy that they don't have time for doing anything. You've been trapped. You've been trapped and you don't realize it. Like tomorrow, I'm talking at Iron Sharpens Iron, and one of the points I'm making is that if your life doesn't have any margin for good works, which have been prepared beforehand by God to do these good works, if your life doesn't have the ability to do those good works, there's something wrong with your life. There's something wrong with the way you're structuring your life. You don't have any margin. So he'll do that. Of course, he can make you sin. He can tempt you. But really, if he can't get that, he'll just make you busy, tired, or then he starts affecting your health. And sometimes, our health is just a symptom of the fall, and probably most likely it is. But sometimes our health is directly tied to oppression, and he can do that. And if it is oppression, then if you pray and seek help and seek counsel and seek prayers from the pastors or whatever, that can break that eventually. And then something just lifts and it just goes away. That's not, the majority. It's usually the rarity. But it is an issue because when we looked at Job, when you saw that passage, what does he do? He inflicts physical harm on Job. He does that. He can do that, and they can do that. They know exactly how we're made, and all they have to have is permission, and they can touch our bodies. They can't kill us, but if God allows them to touch our body, then they can, and they know how to push buttons. So that can happen. It's not all the time, but it's true. It does happen. But prayer is your answer for that, because you hear these case studies, and I've seen many case studies where people go to the doctor and the doctor can't figure out why they're having pain. The doctor can't figure out that, and eventually the doctor starts thinking that the person's making it up. And when they can't figure out where the pain's coming from or why the pain's happening, it's like a clean bill of health, and yet the person's saying, I'm in excruciating pain. It's sometimes spiritual. Again, so that you don't want to just think everything that happens is that. But again, you have to put that in part of the equation. Let's see. Application. It's a warning that spiritual warfare is constant. He never sleeps. And so therefore you have to be vigilant all the time, obviously. And so this is going on. Let's continue in Job. And this is where his wife, after Satan attacks him, and he's full of sores, and he's lost his family, he's lost everything, and he's lost his health because Satan has attacked his body. His wife says, curse God and die. And it's not really an encouraging thing for her to say. There's something wrong with her, apparently, spiritually, for her to say that. I don't know, what kind of couple would say that, but she does. And really, literally, the word means bless God and die. And it's a negative. But what happens is in the Hebrew speech, barak means bless, and they will sometimes substitute that in for curse to avoid saying curse God. And so in this case, they're using the word bless, but it means curse God and die. What she's meaning is she's not saying to disbelieve God. That's not the issue here. She's wanting to turn away from God and just get out of relationship with him, get out of fellowship with him. Well, like we say, if you're a believer, you can never lose your salvation. So this is not a salvation passage. She's not saying that. She's actually telling him to apostatize is what she's telling him. And apostasy is walking away from the faith. It doesn't mean the person doesn't believe in God. It doesn't mean they're not saved. It just means that they're giving up on their faith and accepting the despair and the death. And that's what a lot of people do. They walk away from their faith and they give in to despair. Despair is the biblical name for depression. And I'm not saying that all depression is just simply despair, because depression can be clinical, no doubt about that. But many people actually cause themselves despair because they don't focus in on the right things. They focus in on the negative, and they're highly neurotic. And if a person's highly neurotic, they always think in negative terms. And look, man, if you're highly neurotic and you're living this life, and especially the older you get, things get worse, you have a lot of people who will just walk away from the faith. And it starts with them not going to church or Bible study, whatever, and they just kind of drift out. It doesn't mean they lose their salvation. It just means they're walking away. They're not in fellowship anymore. That's what she's saying. That's what she's saying. She's saying, look, you know what? It doesn't pay to serve God. If this is the way it all goes and we lose everything, you've lost your health, and this is what it means, then there's no point in serving him. Let's just walk away. That's the idea. And so, in essence, she sees no purpose in being loyal to God anymore. And I get that. I mean, if you talk to people who have been through a lot of tragedy, and they haven't embraced it properly, they're not suffering well, they're very mad at God. They're very mad at God for the way things have went. And again, they're framing everything wrong. They're not seeing things properly. But this is the number one way people walk away from God and apostatize. It's not theology. It's not a theological decision. It's a suffering decision, typically. And they just cannot believe that God allowed them to go through this, or that someone died, or someone was taken away from them, they lost their job. They cannot believe God would allow that. And even though you tell them, hey, it's about free will, and this is why we live in this world, because of free will, it doesn't help them. It doesn't help them, because they intently believe that God should intervene and stop free will. Well, if you're thinking like that in those terms, which is not in reality, and you think that God should stop anyone that pulls a gun and turns the bullets into bubbles, or stops any theft, or anything like that, then that reality doesn't work, because then that would mean God would infringe on the free will of even the perpetrators, and he doesn't do that. He doesn't do that. That's just not the way our world is designed. It can't be and allow free will if God is intervening all the time in the affairs of men. And again, I'm not saying he's a deist or anything like that God doesn't get into the affairs of men, but there's a conservation of miracles with God, because if he intervenes too much, it starts messing with our free will, and he refuses to do that. He refuses to get involved in that. But again, you can know that intellectually, but then when something happens to you, we don't know how we're going to react, and then that's what happens. People start blaming God, and they turn into Job's wife. I understand it. I understand it. I understand where they're coming from. It's not correct thinking, but I understand the emotions. So she wants him just to walk away. And instead of clinging to God, instead of having faith in him and trusting him for all that's happening, she just wants him to walk away, because she's already there. She's already walked away. That's the idea. The reason she says that is because her heart's already there. So the idea then it comes to the biblical principle of persevering through trials. That's it. That's the idea, is you're called to persevere through trials. Now, perseverance is not a guarantee. Perseverance is a desire of God that you would persevere to the end, but it is not a guarantee. So I don't want you to think in Calvinistic terms that only believers will persevere. Not all believers persevere. They don't always persevere to the end. Ananias and Sapphira didn't. Neither did the Corinth church, and many believers that I know didn't persevere, and they died. Doesn't mean they're not believers. They just didn't persevere. They didn't suffer well. They don't like to suffer well. And so they ran from their trials. They shrunk back. They went into a mode of avoiding pain at all costs. And there's people that live their lives like that. They avoid pain at all costs, and they avoid stress at all costs, and basically they insulate themselves from the outside world. It's a very sad life in the way they live because they're afraid of pain. And they're afraid of persevering. They don't want to push through pain. They don't want to, and that's the thing too, you know, if you think about some of our younger kids, and it's not a knock on them, but my generation and the millennial generation is not parenting correctly. So it's those two parental generations. You ever heard of this gentle parenting? Have you heard of that? It's ungodly, okay? It's ungodly, gentle parenting. So they don't want to discipline the child. We're going to sit down and talk to Junior at 5 years old and have a PhD conversation with Junior why he's acting out. And, you know, it's gentle. We're not going to spank. We're not going to discipline. If we discipline, it's just me talking. You know, it's just stupid. And what you get is rebellion on your hands because the parents are not showing two things. As parents, you got to show two things to a child: power and authority. That you have the authority to discipline that child, and you have the power to do it too. And if you don't show those two things, authority and power, that kid's going to get away from you. And so the gentle parenting restricts the parents from using their authority and using their power and puts the child in power. So what ends up happening is the parents in this gentle parenting create a bubble around the child to where they will not let the child feel any pain in life. And it's like I talked about a couple Sundays ago, where you have these bulldozer parents that are on the playgrounds with their kids, you know, and they have to schedule these play dates now and stuff. And it's like, that is so foreign to me when I grew up. We left the house in the morning. We didn't come home until the lights came on in the thing. You know, and it's like, wow, totally different world. We have to schedule play dates, and it's just like, what? So you schedule these play dates, and so they're at the park or whatever, and the moms are over there like the teachers were on the play yard refereeing the whole playground. And so no one ever gets twisted off. No one ever gets mad. The moms are keeping everything, quote unquote, fair, whatever. And they think that's a happy day. The problem is those kids are not learning how to socially deal with other people that have different temperaments, that have different attitudes, sometimes are bullies or whatever. Just like when you and I were on the playground, we had to figure out what kids we want to hang out with and what kids we don't. Which kids that are good at playing games, and then we had to make ourselves desirable to other kids to play with. And how did we do that? Well, the way you made yourself desirable is if we're going to play dodgeball, we play by the rules. But if I go and I don't play by the rules, then no one wants to play with me. So we learned socially, if I'm going to get along in this world, I got to play by the rules. And then if I play by the rules, people want to play with me. I become a desire for somebody that wants to hang out with me and be friends, right? And then you learn the opposite sex and how to deal with the opposite sex. And you learn those things, but there was no referees. You figured that out on your own. Well, the gentle parenting movement doesn't allow that. And so they're being carried all the way through in bubble wrap, all the way until they graduate. And then they decide to take the bubble wrap off after they graduate. And it's like fragile glass house city. They can't take anything that's hard. They can't work very long because they never had chores. They don't understand what working is. So, they got to work 2 hours at Starbucks. Oh my gosh, it's a killer. I can't believe they're making me work 2 hours. It's just really hard, really hard. And then it's like if I have any controversy in my life, it's just like I come apart. And so here's the sad news on this. The sad news is that generation is overly medicated because they can't take anything. So where do they go? They go to psychotropic drugs or street drugs or whatever in order to cope with life. So you got all these kids on antidepressants. And look, I'm not saying some of them don't need them. They probably do. But a lot of them, they just have went into the psychiatry world and they're just loaded up with medicine. So the millennials and the younger generation are becoming the most medicated psychologically we've ever seen in U.S. history because they can't cope with things. And really what it comes down to is they can't persevere. They were not taught how to work through hardness and pain and suffering and to be able to push through, right? It's that thing. And then, the kids, because they've never been disciplined, they're just totally animals when they're older. No one can control them. They just, they get it. They're an HR nightmare or their company's nightmare, right? Because it's just, you try to put boundaries on them, and they come from a home that mom and dad never put boundaries on them. And so they get into the workforce, and it's like they don't understand boundaries. It's just, they're impossible. Now, I'm not saying that everyone's like that, but my generation parented like that, and the millennials are parenting like that. And it's created this soft, non-perseverance type of individual. But when you look in the Bible, man, these people are hardcore. They are hardcore. Our Lord is hardcore. I mean, he didn't have a place to lay his head. He's traveling all over the place. He's walking wherever they goes. Barely had anything to eat. Very tough individuals, right? Being able to persevere through things. That's what Job is illustrating to us. Man, that guy persevered all the way, and he didn't curse God. He had his whole body messed up. He's literally dying almost, and he pushes through. So anyway, it's a good reminder for all of us about perseverance. Be able to confront pain and deal with it. Skin for skin, he says to God, and this is Satan's response. Have you considered my servant Job? And so Satan responds with a Hebraism, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. And the word skin is really the word hide, like a hide of an animal, hide of a cow or something like that. So it's hide for hide is what he's trying to say. And so what Satan is trying to say to God is, look, what I have figured out about humans is this, that they're so shallow that they'll trade anything to save their own life. That's how shallow they are. They're afraid of death. And so that's what he's trying to say. So the fact is, yeah, you've taken his kids away, you've taken his property away, but I'm telling you, if you take his health away, that's when he'll curse you. That's when he'll come after you. And so that's what the idea, what he's trying to say. And so he is basically arguing, and he makes the argument about us, that Job's piety is all about just self-interest. The only reason he likes you, God, the only reason he goes to church, so to speak, the only reason he pays you any attention is because you have a hedge around him. It's because of all the good things you've given him. That's why he likes you. That's why he follows you. But he says, look, skin for skin. Take it all away and see what he does. He will trade anything for his life. I guarantee you that. Now, obviously, Job passed the test on that, right? You know the rest of the story on that. But it is a cynical claim, and it's a claim on Job that is a claim on all humanity. And for the most part, Satan is right about the majority of humanity. Job obviously is a believer in God, and Job represents that remnant believer that will stay faithful to God despite losing everything. Okay? He's a picture of that. But where is Satan getting at? He understands the nature of humanity. He's not stupid. And he is saying, look, I've seen the nature of humanity. And the fact that I'm walking to and fro all around this earth, I see how humans are. They will do anything to save their own skin. And you know what? If Satan was referring to not Job, but Gavin Newsom, you would say, yeah, you're totally right. Absolutely, that guy would do that. Or any of the other creeps that, George Soros or whatever. You would say, yeah, you're right about George Soros. He would trade anything for his own skin. Totally, I get that. So what God is trying to show is believers, true believers that are faithful to him are different. That's what he's shown with Job. This is not a picture of all humanity. Job is a picture of remnant believers who stay faithful and persevere to the end. That's what Job represents. And that's the point God's trying to make about humanity. Narrow is the path and broad is the road, right? You know that. So let's go to one more thing and then we'll finish this up. Behemoth and Leviathan. They're not necessarily like idioms that you wouldn't understand, but they have deeper meanings. And I guess you would consider it an idiom because of what they represent. And this is obviously in Job 40 and 41. God is talking to Job about, were you at creation, when I made all these things? And then he goes to the animals and he refers to two different creatures that God made, Behemoth and Leviathan. Look now at Behemoth, which I made along with you. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. And then Leviathan, can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand against me? He is king over all the children of pride. So what you're starting to see here with Behemoth and Leviathan, Behemoth represents this massive land animal creature that's very powerful that all humans were afraid of at the time. And also Leviathan is the sea monster, the sea creature that all humans were afraid of in the ocean. And so there's a lot of symbolism here, especially with Leviathan. So let's go through this. What behemoth grammatically means beasts, okay? And it's referring to a very colossal creature that was on the earth at that period of time. Now, most people, like Answers in Genesis will say that's a dinosaur. Maybe it is. And Leviathan is some type of a dinosaur sea monster, and maybe it is. It's also used elsewhere for chaos and dragon imagery for Leviathan. So when you look at the idiomatic sense of behemoth and Leviathan, you have to look at it symbolically first, okay? Before we get to the literalness of it, you have to understand what the Hebrew is trying to say. In the Hebrew Near East mindset, these are symbols of untamable power and chaos. They're real, but they're symbolic of this chaos and power that no human on earth can master is the idea. But the only one that can master Behemoth and master Leviathan is God himself. And that's the idea that's coming out of this. And so again, Behemoth is the power on the land that no man can control, and Leviathan's the power in the sea that no man can control. And so it exposes basically the limits of man's control on creatures. So it's kind of a flipping of the logic. Like I said here, if Leviathan terrifies you or Behemoth terrifies you, then reverence for God should give you the same posture because he's bigger than them. He's more powerful than them. A couple things then, mythopoetic symbols. So it goes a little bit deeper here. So just hang on with me. There's more here than meets the eye. These are literary features that symbolize chaos. And we could say that maybe Behemoth is Brachiosaurus, maybe, if we wanted to say that. We can say Leviathan is Plesiosaurus, maybe. We're not sure. They're probably dinosaurs, more than likely. It's definitely not an alligator. It's not a hippo. It's not even a elephant, because it talks about Behemoth's tail being like a log type of thing, right? So it's basically the largest forces on planet Earth that man can't control. They're chaotic, but yet they bow to God is the idea. Okay, so therefore God's saying, trust me. When you look at Leviathan, then Leviathan has a lot more aspects to him. Job talks about ready to arouse Leviathan, talking about possibly this sea creature. But then you go into Psalm 74, and Leviathan takes on another aspect. God breaks the heads of Leviathan. Leviathan was supposedly had 7 heads, okay? And then in Psalm 104, there goes that Leviathan which you have made to play there. So to God, Leviathan is this powerful sea creature, but it's like a toy to God, right? And then Isaiah 27 then gives it an eschatological notion. And it says the Lord will slay Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. And this is where people start connecting Leviathan to Satan. And then Job 26, God stirs the seas, pierces the fleeing serpent. And it's also called Rahab as well. So all of a sudden you start looking at the cross references and you're like, wait, this takes on a bigger idea here. In Job, contextually, we're talking about power, we're talking about chaos. But then I go outside of it and it's talking about God breaking the heads of Leviathan, which seems reminiscent to me of Genesis 3:15. And then destroying Leviathan in the end times. So to me, it seems like a reference to Satan. So then let me go deeper, okay? So let's go then to Ugaritic sources, Canaanite sources. Let's go to Mesopotamian sources of what they thought about this creature, okay? So again, you're going into the Near East mindset to get this Hebraism out, okay? So what we have in Near Eastern mythology is that sea monsters regularly appeared as adversaries of the gods, okay? So in Canaanite texts from Ugaritic, describe Baal's victory over Lotan, who was closely related to Leviathan. It's probably the same thing, just different words, different names. And described Leviathan as this fleeing serpent and twisting serpent with 7 heads. If you go to Mesopotamian creation epic, you have Enuma Elish, who tells of Marduk's defeat of Tiamat, the chaos monster of the primordial waters. And Tiamat is probably the same as Leviathan, we're probably thinking. So it's not, these are common myths that are going on in the Near East. So these myths typically follow a pattern, and here's the pattern. Primordial chaos represented by sea monsters threatens cosmic order, but the storm god defeats the monster and establishes divine rule. Okay? That is the pattern. And if you look at that pattern, that is the pattern found in Genesis 1. Between Genesis 1 and 2, I told you guys this, you have all of a sudden God creating everything, and then all of a sudden in verse 2, you have chaos. You have the tohu and bohu that's going on, and they're like, wait a second, how did he create things? And all of a sudden, by verse 2, it's in complete chaos, and then out of the chaos, the tohu vavohu, he creates the order for Adam and Eve and for humans. So the Mesopotamian and Canaanite structures are the same pattern. Chaos with water, and then Leviathan is associated to the chaotic water. Then God destroys that and then creates out of that a divine order. And the divine order is found in Genesis 1. When you see the numbering of the days, that's the divine order. On this day does this, and it was good. But it comes out of the creation. The creation of our world comes out of the chaos. So I think you see the pattern. I think there's enough evidence to say, okay, these are corruptions of what they understood of creation, and obviously Moses put that in Genesis, and they are basically saying the same thing, even though it's corrupted with different names, Tiamat and Lotan. It's Satan. It was the fall of Satan that caused the chaos and the order and the darkness and the primordial waters. And again, who is Leviathan associated to? He's associated to water. which represents chaos and against divine order. And that's Leviathan, but that's also the primordial waters. It's the same thing. It's the same pattern. So the biblical authors drew on familiar mythological images, but transformed them to emphasize, obviously, what God did. And that's what Moses is using. He's using that pattern, the truth of it, and then in explaining this is what actually happened. It's the same thing with Genesis 6. If I go to Mesopotamian literature, if I go to other Near Eastern literature or wherever in the world about the divine beings coming down and creating hybrids, well, all I have to do is go to Genesis 6, and that tells me the truth of what happened there. But yet it's in all the mythologies. That's the idea. So unlike the pagan myths, which the gods struggled against chaos, the biblical writers show that God is in complete control of chaos and Leviathan from the very beginning, which would be Satan and the chaotic order, right? Therefore, Leviathan primarily represents the forces of chaos, Satan, that oppose God's ordered creation. Okay? So in ancient cosmology, the sea represented the realm of chaos and death. Well, that's true, because to the Jews, the oceans represented chaos and death and uninhabitable places. The Jews do not like water in the ancient world. You can't live there. We can't breathe there. It's not made for us. And it represents the judgments of Noah's flood. That's what water represents. And it represented many times the opening into the underworld. Because if Leviathan, that's where Leviathan is, then that's where the opening to the underworld goes. So it's, that's why the oceans are connected to Satan. Oh, by the way, where does the Antichrist come from? He will rise out of the sea. He rises out of the sea. The sea represents chaos, disorder, Leviathan, Satan, and it represents the Gentile world. So he rises out of the sea. It's not an accident, it's all connected. If you follow the pattern, right? You got to follow the pattern. So Leviathan is the Lord of the sea, embodies everything that threatens God's good creation. The symbolism then extends beyond natural force to include polemic enemies, personal trials, spiritual opposition, and all that. That's what the psalmist is speaking about. So really, Leviathan is your spiritual warfare. That's who you're fighting, is Leviathan, which is Satan. Okay, chaos, disorder. Satan is trying to bring chaos and disorder to your life. Now, when you go a little bit deeper, so just follow with me, because there's a lot here. So when you go to Jewish tradition, I want to go to early Christian tradition about Leviathan. Jewish literature expanded the biblical references to Leviathan, often pairing it with Behemoth as great creatures of the sea and land. Some traditions speak of Leviathan being served as food at the Messianic banquet, symbolizing the complete defeat of chaos in the age to come. So in the Messianic banquet, which we call the marriage supper of the Lamb, the Jews held the tradition that part of the feast would be to eat Leviathan, symbolizing the idea of you're eating it in defeat, and you would eat Leviathan. You're going to eat literally, his body, or whatever. And again, it's metaphoric, it's symbolic, but it's the idea of eating this creature is the idea of defeating the creature. And so that's where in Jewish tradition they held that that's where you would eat his body, is at the Messianic banquet. Early church writers, they went instantly to Satan on this one. They instantly to evil power. They saw it no other way. And so they all connected it with spiritual warfare and obviously divine victory. Now, in demonology, we're going one step further now. We just keep going down. It's layered. In demonology, a Leviathan is associated with the deadly sin of envy or corrosive jealousy, to possess what others have. He foments resentment that fosters comparison. And again, this is in demonology. By the way, Leviathan can be portrayed as both male and female. and he's associated with masculinized lesbianism, or butch. That's the common word to say it. Why is that? Leviathan is transgender. So, when you're looking at demonology, it's not a mistake when you find out that some of these gods and demons that people worshipped in the ancient world were transgender. They had both genders. Okay? Because it went against creation, it went against the order, and it doesn't shock me that in demonology that Leviathan can be both male and female. Right? And why would it be associated to masculinized lesbianism? It's weird, isn't it? Right? So anyway, that's a little bit of demonology. So at the end of the day, you have chaos and disorder, and you have evil and opposition to God. That's the big ticket items that he represents. And I think it's clear, and so the Bible doesn't state it specifically, but I think when you look at all the signs here, Leviathan is representative of Satan. There's no doubt about that. He's a power that you and I can't overcome. Only God can overcome him, right, through Christ. Only God can tame him. Only God's Leviathan is like a toy in God's hands. That's how Satan would be to God, right? He's just a toy, and he, God has ultimate power, and he will destroy Leviathan. I can't see anything other than Satan in that. So I think that the water, the whole thing, is connected to Satanism and demonology, obviously. So that's behind the words behind Leviathan and Behemoth. I know that went a little bit deeper than you want to, but I wanted you to know the whole background on that.